a team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
It was preserved under a layer of volcanic ash from Mount St. Helens eruption over 15,000 years ago.
For decades, the story of the first people to set foot in the Americas was treated as a settled truth, a chapter of science believed to be complete, a single route, a fixed moment in time, and a distinctive technology shaped everything we thought we knew. Yet, at a remote rock shelter in Oregon, an excavation never intended to search for humans encountered something that should not have existed. An object buried beneath volcanic ash, sealed away from time itself. It did not simply raise a new question. It forced us to confront a far more unsettling possibility: that the entire timeline of our origins may have been wrong. The completed map. Within the world of North American archaeology, one theory shaped nearly a century of thought. It was not merely a hypothesis, but a map that guided every search, every excavation, and every conclusion. This framework became known as Clovis first. Its logic was clear, persuasive, and internally consistent. Around 13,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, immense ice sheets covering much of Canada began to retreat. Their melting opened a narrow inland corridor. Through this passage, highly skilled groups of hunter-gatherers moved from Siberia into what is now Alaska, then continued southward. They were the pioneers, the first arrivals. The evidence for their presence appeared unmistakable. Finely crafted stone spear points, marked by a distinctive groove at the base, became known as Clovis points. These tools were uncovered across North America, from one coast to the other. Their wide distribution and consistent age reinforced a simple but powerful story. Clovis culture represented the founding population of the Americas. Before them, the continent was believed to be untouched by human footsteps. This idea proved so effective that it created a sharp temporal boundary in the minds of archaeologists. It was known as the Clovis horizon. Any evidence dated later than 13,000 years received careful attention. Any claim of human presence earlier than that moment faced extreme skepticism and was often dismissed as the result of faulty dating, disturbed sediment layers, or flawed interpretation. This cognitive map defined not only time, but also space. It identified where researchers should look and where they should not. Vast plains once roamed by mammoths, and ancient bison became focal points for excavation. In contrast, regions thought to be too harsh during the peak of the last glacial maximum, when ice coverage reached its greatest extent around 20,000 years ago, were removed from the historical map. One such forgotten place was the dry volcanic high plateau of south-central Oregon. According to accepted climate and geological models, this land was cold, barren, and unable to provide the resources needed for human survival. It was treated as a void, a blank page in the chronicle of human settlement. As a result, for generations, no one searched for anything of importance there. History appeared complete. The map seemed finished. Unexpected marks on a blank page. In the early years of a team of archaeologists led by Dr. Patrick O'Grady of the University of Oregon began work at a modest-looking site called Rimrock Draw. Their objective was practical and far from revolutionary. They were not searching for the first Americans. Instead, they sought to study environmental change and animal life near the end of the Ice Age. The Rimrock Draw rock shelter, a shallow overhang in a basalt cliff, appeared to offer potential refuge for ancient animals. The team hoped to uncover bones and other environmental indicators. They expected disturbed surface soils, a chaotic mix of sediment carried by wind and water. Holding fragments from only the past few thousand years, what emerged after the first layers were removed was something quietly unsettling, rather than the disorder typical of open-air sites. The sediment layers at Rimrock Draw displayed an astonishing level of order. Each layer rested neatly atop the next, flat, intact, and clearly separated. Dark bands indicating periods of activity alternated with lighter bands that marked long stretches of calm. The pattern resembled ruled lines in a geological notebook. There was no evidence of material collapsing from above, no roots dragging younger soil downward, no signs of water mixing layers together. In archaeology, this kind of pristine preservation, known as stratigraphy preserved in place, is exceptionally rare. It is usually found only in deep caves or in sites buried rapidly by natural events. This order alone posed a puzzle. It suggested that the site had been shielded from natural forces in an unusual way for thousands of years. It felt less like an exposed shelter and more like a carefully maintained archive of time. Such preservation defied every expectation for a shallow, open overhang. The stillness of the ground did not convey peace. It carried a sense of unease. It proved nothing about human presence, yet it hinted that this place followed a different set of physical rules. The archaeologists found themselves facing a perfect context, a timeline so clear that it seemed unnatural, preserved by a mechanism they could not yet explain. The ground appeared to be guarding a secret, and its structure was the first lock. Digging into the layer of silence. The geological anomaly forced the archaeological team to excavate with extreme care. Every centimeter of soil removed was not merely a descent into the ground, but a journey backward through time, as if turning the pages of a book whose numbering was perfectly intact. Within those pages, the first signs of human presence began to emerge. Small flakes of worked stone, known as debitage, came into view. At first glance, they might have appeared incidental, yet they were anything but random. They appeared within specific sediment layers and were found together, indicating that tool-making activity had taken place directly at the site. What truly caused the researchers to pause was not the presence of these tools, but their repetition with depth. One layer containing tools was followed by an empty band of sediment, representing a long interval when the shelter stood unused. Deeper still, another tool-bearing layer appeared. This pattern repeated again and again. It showed that this was not a temporary refuge used by a single wandering group. It was a known place, one that people returned to many times over a very long span of time. With every newly exposed layer, the moment of first occupation was pushed further back into the past. The excavation became a tense and methodical process. The slow rhythm of scraping away soil stood in sharp contrast to the accelerating pulse of realization. They had passed the 13,000-year mark, the Clovis horizon. According to established theory, everything below that level should have been devoid of human traces. Yet the tools continued to appear. They differed from Clovis technology, simpler in form, but unmistakably shaped by human hands. The pressure intensified. The team was no longer merely documenting a discovery. They were assembling evidence against one of the most fundamental pillars of their discipline. Each new fragment of stone represented another anomaly, and those anomalies were accumulating. They knew they were approaching a boundary, not only one buried in the earth, but one embedded within human understanding itself. What lay beneath the seal? The excavation pressed onward, moving below the layers filled with tools from the period before Clovis. Then the archaeologists' trowels encountered something entirely different. A fine, uniform layer of pale gray-white sediment stretched across the excavation area like a blanket. Geological analysis quickly confirmed its identity. It was volcanic ash, known as tephra, more precisely. It was ash from a major eruption of Mount St. Helens, located hundreds of miles to the north. This eruption occurred around 15,600 years ago. The ash layer represented an instantaneous event in geological time. It fell from the sky, blanketed the landscape, and sealed everything beneath it. It formed an absolute temporal marker, a boundary that could not be crossed. Anything found intact below this layer had to be older than 15,600 years. With mounting tension, the team began to carefully remove the ash. Immediately beneath it, within a darker sediment layer, they discovered a cluster of bones. They were not scattered randomly, as would be expected if an animal had died and decayed naturally. Instead, they were concentrated within a small area. Initial examination identified them as the remains of an extinct camel species, Camelops histernus, one of the giant animals of the Ice Age. But what caused everyone to hold their breath was revealed during closer inspection of the jaw and tooth fragments. Their surfaces bore fine, parallel scratches. Under microscopic analysis, these marks resolved into clear, deliberate cuts made by a sharp stone edge. They were unmistakable signs of butchery. The most decisive evidence, however, had yet to arrive. A fragment of camel tooth enamel was sent to a laboratory for radiocarbon dating. This method determines the age of organic material by measuring the decay of the carbon-14 isotope. When the results came back, they confirmed the unimaginable. The calibrated age of the tooth was approximately 18,250 years before the present. This figure did not merely cross the 13,000-year Clovis boundary, it obliterated it. It placed humans, actively butchering a giant camel, in Central Oregon more than 5,000 years earlier than was thought possible. This was no longer an anomaly. It was a physical reality, dated by two independent methods, volcanic ash and radiocarbon analysis, and it stood in direct contradiction to the entire narrative of human settlement in the Americas. When the map no longer holds, the number 18,250 was not simply a new data point, it was a destabilizing force. At first, the mind could attempt to reject it, searching for alternative explanations. Perhaps the sample was contaminated. Perhaps the ash layer had been disturbed. Yet the evidence at Rimrock Draw was too precise, too tightly bound. The intact sediment layers, the unmistakable cut marks on bone, and the dual confirmation from geological dating and radiocarbon analysis closed every possible escape. Once denial faded, a more unsettling realization took shape. The problem was not the data. The problem was the map. If humans were present in Oregon 18,250 years ago, then the Clovis Ice Corridor story was not merely incorrect, it was impossible. Geological and glaciological data independently confirmed that at that time, North America remained locked in the grip of the last glacial maximum. The immense Laurentide ice sheet in the east and the Cordilleran ice sheet in the west were still joined, forming an unbroken wall of ice stretching for thousands of miles. The inland corridor that Clovis groups were believed to have used did not yet exist. It would not open for thousands of years. The people at Rimrock Draw could not have come that way. The collapse of the Clovis route demanded an alternative explanation, and only one plausible option remained: a coastal migration. The Kelp Highway hypothesis proposes that the first people moved south along the Pacific coastline, likely by boat, sustained by rich marine resources. Once dismissed as unlikely, this idea now became the most reasonable explanation in light of the Rimrock Draw evidence. It transforms the image of the first Americans. They were not solely land-based hunters walking through a narrow passage. They may have been skilled seafarers, equipped with the knowledge and technology to navigate one of the most challenging coastlines on Earth. Then there were the tools. A scraper made of orange agate was found near the camel remains. Agate does not occur naturally at Rimrock Draw. This means the material was transported over a considerable distance. In the past, this might have been dismissed as a curiosity. Now it stands as evidence that humans 18,000 years ago were capable of planning, long-range movement, and perhaps even complex exchange networks. They were not merely surviving, they were organized. The entire perception of the past had been overturned. The old map no longer worked. Scientists were left staring at a vast continent and a far deeper history, without any guiding lines. Deeper layers untouched. The most unsettling consequence of the Rimrock Draw discovery comes not from what has been excavated, but from what still lies beneath the surface. The camel remains dated to 18,250 years ago. The evidence that rewrote history did not rest at the deepest level containing signs of human activity. Below it, the excavation revealed even deeper and older sediment layers. Within these layers, archaeologists identified stone flakes and other indicators of human presence. By the logic of stratigraphy, these materials must be older than 18,250 years. Human history at this site extends even further back than its most shocking discovery. Yet just as the investigation was poised to enter an entirely unknown span of time, it stopped. The deeper layers were not fully excavated. The reason was not a lack of evidence, but the constraints of the modern world. Funding limitations, a persistent challenge in scientific research, played a role. More importantly, conservation protocols intervened. Rimrock Draw is now recognized as one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America. Rushing the excavation could destroy microscopic evidence or compromise the integrity of fragile sediment layers. Protecting the site for future generations, armed with analytical technologies not yet available, took priority over satisfying immediate curiosity. This pause created a new kind of tension. The truth was not hidden by any secret authority, but by the very rules designed to preserve it. Researchers and observers were left suspended in an uneasy state. Evidence of an even older human presence lies just beneath the surface, perhaps only a few centimeters away, yet remains inaccessible. It suggests that the 18,000-year story, already revolutionary, may be only the middle chapter of a much longer narrative. The greatest mystery is no longer when humans arrived here. It is how far back the story truly goes, and whether we will ever be permitted to know the full answer. The silence of the deepest layers at Rimrock Draw carries more weight than any spoken conclusion. The void in history. In the end, the true answer offered by Rimrock Draw is not a revised timeline or a newly drawn migration route. It is the recognition of a vast void in our knowledge. The truth buried beneath Oregon ash for 18,000 years was not lost to conspiracy, but to a systemic failure of perception. We did not find the earliest Americans sooner, not because they were impossible to detect, but because we were conditioned not to look for them there. The Clovis first model functioned as a cognitive filter. It directed attention toward certain places and times, while rendering others invisible. Rimrock Draw remained unseen for decades, despite being in plain sight. The reality is that human settlement in the Americas did not begin 13,000 years ago. That moment represents only the chapter we were able to read. What came before? Thousands of years of exploration, adaptation, and survival remains largely untold. The people at Rimrock Draw, who butchered camels and shaped tools from agate, were not the beginning. They may have been descendants of generations who had already lived on this continent for a very long time, following a path we are only now beginning to imagine. Rimrock Draw does not provide a new complete story. Instead, it tears apart the old one and reveals the true scale of what we do not know. It offers no satisfaction of a solved puzzle, only the unease of realizing that our foundation of knowledge rests on a small fragment of the truth. History was not buried by soil and stone, but by our own assumptions. Now that the void has been exposed, the challenge is not to rush to fill it, but to learn to accept its existence and to begin the search again. This time, without a map.